In a distant corner of history, where mysticism and reality intertwine, we find a fascinating narrative, that of the Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel. Imagine, for a moment, ancestral tribes, connected to the land and faith, who claim to be descendants of the ancient lineages of Israel. But what do we really know about their origins? How did Ethiopian oral tradition shape the perception of their identity? While many believe they come from the tribe of Judah, others suggest a cultural fusion with the Cushites of the region. And what if I told you that this connection could reveal more about the complexity of the Ethiopian people than we imagine? What happens when history meets genetics? With each discovery, new ties are formed, and old mysteries are unraveled. The unique religious practices and oral traditions, which distance themselves from rabbinic Judaism, make us question, to what extent do these differences reflect an independent evolution or an adaptation? Prepare yourself for an engaging journey, where history, faith, and science intersect, challenging everything you thought you knew about these guardians of a rich heritage. History and origins of Beta Israel. Beta Israel, known as Ethiopian Jews, have a rich and complex history that intertwines with oral traditions and mythical narratives. Many of these stories claim that they are descendants of one of the lost tribes of Israel, especially the tribes of Dan or Judah. This connection to the past is a fundamental aspect of the cultural and religious identity of the Beta Israel people. The oral traditions, passed down from generation to generation, are a testament to the resilience and continuity of their culture in the face of adversity. It is believed that the origin of Beta Israel dates back more than 2,000 years, although the accuracy of these claims is often debated. Some narratives suggest that they may have settled in Ethiopia after the era of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, a myth that carries great significance for the community. The figure of Menelik, who according to legend was the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, is central to many stories that shape the identity of Beta Israel. This historical connection to biblical characters not only legitimizes their presence in Ethiopia but also brings them closer to the broader Jewish narrative. What is fascinating is how these stories intertwine with reality. The presence of practices and rituals that resemble Jewish traditions, even if in a distinct form, reinforces the idea that Beta Israel has a deep relationship with Jewish heritage. However, the lack of written documentation over many centuries has left their history somewhat nebulous, leading to various interpretations and speculations about their origins. Thus, Beta Israel has become a people who, through their culture and traditions, defend a narrative of belonging and identity. In addition to the oral traditions, Beta Israel was also influenced by their coexistence with different ethnic and religious groups in Ethiopia. The blending of cultures over the centuries brought nuances to their identity, enriching their practices and beliefs. This coexistence, although sometimes tense, also allowed them to preserve their traditions while interacting with Christians and Muslims. The result is a cultural tapestry that is both unique and representative of Ethiopian diversity. The history and origins of Beta Israel are a combination of myth, tradition, and reality. The narratives surrounding their ancestry not only underpin their identity but also reflect a deep desire for connection with a past that feels, in some way, lost, but that continues to be relevant for new generations. The quest for recognition and belonging is a constant, and the stories they tell about their origins play a vital role in this process. Migrations and settlements. The migration of Beta Israel to Israel in the late 20th century was a milestone in the community's history, allowing many to fulfill a long-held dream of returning to the Promised Land. This mass movement was driven by a combination of factors, including the growing hostility and persecutions they faced in Ethiopia. The 1980s, marked by political instability and devastating famine, caused many Ethiopians to seek refuge elsewhere, and Israel became a natural destination for those who identified as Jews. Operation Moses, carried out in 1984, was one of the first significant efforts to remove Beta Israel from Ethiopia. This secret mission, which involved the evacuation of thousands of people, was a testament to a nation's determination to rescue its citizens. The scenes of flights transporting Beta Israel to Israel were emblematic of a cultural and religious revival, bringing hope and renewal to a community that had endured so much suffering. However, migration also brought challenges. Upon arriving in Israel, many Beta Israel encountered a reality different from what they had imagined. The integration process was not simple. Adapting to a new culture, language, and way of life required considerable effort. Moreover, the prejudices and socio-economic difficulties they faced in their new land tested the community's resilience. Meanwhile, those who remained in Ethiopia continued to live in villages in the northwest of the country, where they coexisted with Christian and Muslim populations. This coexistence was marked by a series of cultural interactions, which, although complex, allowed Beta Israel to maintain their traditions and religious practices. Life in the villages, far from the eyes of the outside world, preserved many aspects of their culture, which became even more important as the community found itself pressured by external changes. The contrast between the lives of Beta Israel in Israel and Ethiopia is a reminder of the complexities of migration and what it means to be part of a diaspora. The migration experience is often filled with hopes and challenges, and the history of Beta Israel illustrates these dynamics in a compelling way. The search for a home is not just a matter of geography, but also of identity and belonging, aspects that continue to shape the narrative of this community to this day. Religious practices and culture. The religious practices of Beta Israel constitute a unique expression of Judaism, which distinguishes itself from traditional rabbinic Judaism. They maintain a series of rituals and celebrations that reflect their beliefs and traditions, developed over centuries within a diverse cultural context. The observance of the Sabbath, Jewish holidays, and life ceremonies, such as weddings and funerals, are fundamental moments in community life, and they are carried out in a way that preserves their cultural specificities. One of the most fascinating aspects of Beta Israel's religiosity is their emphasis on oral traditions. While Western Judaism is strongly based on written texts, such as the Torah and the Talmud, Beta Israel transmits their teachings and stories through oral tradition. This practice not only strengthens community bonds but also ensures that the people's culture and history are preserved and passed down authentically. In addition, the figure of the priest, or kes, plays a central role in Beta Israel's religious practices. The kesim are responsible for conducting ceremonies and keeping traditions alive, serving as spiritual leaders and community mediators. Their presence is essential for the continuity of religious practices and the maintenance of the people's identity, especially in times of change and adaptation. The purification rituals and dietary practices also deserve mention. Beta Israel follows a diet that, although influenced by Ethiopian culture, reflects dietary laws similar to kosher practices. These dietary observances not only have religious significance but also reinforce cultural identity and community cohesion, functioning as a means of cultural resistance in a constantly changing world. The culture of Beta Israel is a mosaic of influences that, despite its uniqueness, also engages with Ethiopian diversity. Their music, dance, and crafts are vibrant expressions of their heritage, combining traditional elements with contemporary influences. This intersection of traditions makes Beta Israel an example of how communities can preserve their identities while interacting with other cultures, creating a rich and multifaceted narrative. Historical and mythical narratives. The historical and mythical narratives surrounding Beta Israel are fascinating and play a crucial role in shaping their identity. One of the most prominent legends is the story of Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This mythical connection not only legitimizes the presence of Beta Israel in Ethiopia but also offers a sense of grandeur and dignity to a community that has faced centuries of marginalization and hardship. According to tradition, Menelik was taken to Ethiopia by his mother, who wanted to protect him. This narrative is often used to explain the connection between Beta Israel and the Ethiopian monarchy, as well as their claim to noble ancestry. The legend of Menelik serves as a symbol of resistance and strength, reminding Beta Israel of their place in history and the importance of their culture. It is an example of how stories can shape a people's self-image and inspire a sense of belonging. Additionally, the stories that Beta Israel tell about their origins have deep implications for their collective identity. These narratives are not just accounts of the past, but also shape how the community sees itself in the present and how it projects itself into the future. Through these stories, Beta Israel reaffirms its connection to Jewish heritage and strengthens bonds within the community, creating a cohesive social fabric. The legends also play a crucial role in educating younger generations. Children are taught about their history and heritage from an early age, ensuring that the rich tapestry of narratives is not lost over time. This transmission of knowledge is vital for preserving the people's identity and traditions, especially in a world that is constantly changing and may threaten cultural continuity. Religious legitimacy and recognition. When it comes to Beta Israel, it is impossible to ignore the debate surrounding their religious legitimacy. For many, the question is simple: are they Jews or not? The State of Israel, over the decades, has had to address this question pragmatically. In 1975, the World Zionist Organization recognized Beta Israel as part of the Jewish people. This decision was fundamental as it opened the doors for thousands of Ethiopians to immigrate to Israel, especially during the rescue operations known as Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991. These immigration operations were historic milestones. Operation Moses, for example, clandestinely brought about 8,000 Beta Israel to Israel, while Operation Solomon, just 7 years later, managed to rescue approximately 14,000. For many of these immigrants, arriving in Israel represented the fulfillment of a dream, the realization of an identity that had been historically contested. The perception of being legitimate Jews is a central element for the self-esteem and identity of this group. However, the question of legitimacy is not limited to official recognition. Within the Jewish community itself, there are voices that question and even reject this identity. Some argue that the religious practices of Beta Israel do not perfectly align with rabbinic traditions, which generates a certain skepticism. This leads to the need for a deeper dialogue between the different branches of Judaism to establish a consensus on what it means to be Jewish. Moreover, the recognition of Beta Israel as legitimate Jews also brought internal challenges. Upon arriving in Israel, many encountered the reality of a country that, despite being the promised land, is also a place of complex social interactions. The cultural shock and struggle for acceptance in an environment that often saw them as outsiders were and continue to be relevant issues. The tensions between Ethiopian Jewish communities and other Israeli communities reveal that legal recognition does not necessarily guarantee social acceptance. The recognition of Beta Israel by the State of Israel represents a significant step toward inclusion. However, there is still a long way to go in terms of acceptance and social integration. This challenge reflects the complexity surrounding Jewish identity in such a diverse and constantly changing world. Genetic evidence and studies. When discussing the ancestry of Beta Israel, science enters the scene with a series of genetic studies aimed at clarifying the history of this people. These studies have been crucial in understanding the origin of Ethiopian Jews and their connections with other populations, both in the Middle East and Africa. Genetic research over the years has made significant advances, allowing scientists to analyze the DNA of Beta Israel individuals and compare this information with samples from other groups. One of the first studies to gain prominence was conducted in 2009, which found evidence that Beta Israel has significant African ancestry, but also genetic traits that connect them to populations in the Middle East. This suggests that the history of Beta Israel is more complex than often thought. The presence of genetic markers similar to those of Jewish populations in the Middle East reinforces the idea that they may indeed have roots that trace back to the tribes of Israel. However, the interpretation of these data is not simple. While some see the genetic link as proof of Beta Israel's legitimacy within the Jewish community, others question the relevance of this information. After all, what does it mean to have a common genetic trait? This is a question that goes beyond biology and touches on cultural and social aspects. Genetics can help tell part of the story, but it is not the only narrative to be considered. In addition to cultural implications, these studies have also generated an ethical debate about genetic research in minority populations. The exploration of their identities through scientific methods raises questions about consent and representation. How do Beta Israel feel about studies that attempt to categorize their ancestry? This is a question that must be approached with sensitivity. In short, the genetic analysis of Beta Israel provides a fascinating insight into the ancestry and identity of this people. However, it is essential that these findings be contextualized within a broader narrative that considers not only biology but also culture and lived history. Genetic composition. The investigation into the genetic composition of Beta Israel has revealed intriguing results that provide a clearer view of the roots of this people. DNA studies have shown that most of Beta Israel has a predominance of African ancestors. This discovery is significant because it reinforces Beta Israel's historical connection to the African continent, challenging some narratives that attempt to distance this community from its African origins. In addition to the African predominance, DNA tests also indicate that there is a small percentage of Semitic origin among Beta Israel. This discovery suggests that, throughout history, there have been interactions between Beta Israel and other groups, possibly including Jewish populations from the Middle East. The combination of African and Semitic ancestors helps draw a more precise line about Beta Israel's identity, showing that they are the result of a long process of migration and cultural mixing. However, the interpretation of these results is not without controversy. Some critics argue that emphasizing genetic composition may divert attention from the rich cultural and social traditions that Beta Israel has cultivated. After all, the identity of a people should not be reduced to numbers and percentages in a DNA test. It is important to remember that history and culture play fundamental roles in shaping identity, and this cannot be quantified. Furthermore, the discussion about the genetic composition of Beta Israel raises questions about the definition of Jew. What is considered to be a legitimate Jew? Is it based solely on genetic traits, or also on traditions, practices, and shared stories? This is a complex question that continues to fuel debates within the Jewish community and beyond. In summary, the genetic composition of Beta Israel offers valuable insights into their origins, but also highlights the need for a more holistic understanding of identity. Genetics is only one piece of the puzzle, and it is essential to consider the cultural and social dimensions that also shape the experience of Beta Israel. Cultural and social interactions. Over the centuries, Beta Israel, also known as Ethiopian Jews, have shaped their identity not only through their religious practices but also through cultural and social interactions with the groups around them. Ethiopia, with its rich tapestry of ethnicities and religions, provided a unique environment for the development of an ethno-national identity. These interactions were influenced by factors such as trade, migrations, and even conflicts, which, to a large extent, helped define what it means to be Beta Israel. Coexistence with Christian and Muslim communities throughout history generated a series of cultural exchanges. For example, Beta Israel adopted some local practices and traditions that coexist with their Jewish rituals. This cultural syncretism can be observed in festivals, clothing, and even cuisine. Thus, Beta Israel's identity did not form in a vacuum but in a dynamic and interactive context, where dialogue between different cultures resulted in a rich heritage. In addition, the social and political pressures that Beta Israel faced over the years, such as persecution and marginalization, also played a significant role in shaping their identity. The struggle for acceptance and recognition within Ethiopian society contributed to a sense of unity and solidarity among community members. This internal cohesion became even more evident during the efforts to immigrate to Israel, where the need to preserve their culture and traditions became a priority. Social interactions also extended to aspects of everyday life. Trade and agriculture, for example, were areas where Beta Israel often collaborated and competed with other communities. This aspect of social life not only facilitated the exchange of goods but also created interpersonal bonds that helped ease tensions between different groups. Therefore, the history of Beta Israel is not just about preserving a unique identity but also about interconnection and interdependence with other social groups. It is also important to note that cultural and social interactions are not limited to the past. In the present day, the Beta Israel diaspora, which has spread worldwide, continues to create new forms of interaction, adapting to diverse contexts and keeping the flame of their cultural heritage alive. This resilience is a fundamental part of Beta Israel's narrative, showing that, although their roots are deep, their identity is, and always will be, a work in progress. Challenges and controversies. The history of Beta Israel is marked by challenges and controversies surrounding their origin and identity. One of the main issues is the legitimacy of their Jewish identity, which is frequently questioned by different groups, both within and outside the Jewish community. While some claim that Beta Israel has a legitimate connection to the lost tribes of Israel, others argue that their religious practices and traditions differ significantly from traditional rabbinic Judaism, raising questions about their acceptance as part of the Jewish people. These controversies have profound implications, especially in a politically sensitive context like Israel. The immigration of Beta Israel in the 1980s and 1990s, through operations like Operation Moses and Operation Solomon, was a significant milestone, but not without its difficulties. The community often faced resistance and misinformation, both from the general public and government authorities. This resistance not only made it difficult for Beta Israel to integrate into Israeli society but also generated a feeling of alienation and distrust. The issue of Beta Israel's Jewish identity is also a recurring theme in academic debates and among religious leaders. The differences in religious interpretations and practices have led to a disconnect that not only affects the community but also influences public perception of Judaism as a whole. This division reveals not only the complexities of Jewish identity but also how history and culture can shape the perception of a group. In addition to religious issues, there are also social and economic challenges that Beta Israel faces in Israel. Despite immigration, many members of the community still struggle with discrimination and marginalization. Economic inequality is a persistent problem, with many Beta Israel living in adverse conditions compared to other communities. This raises the question of how Israeli society can work to ensure that all its citizens, regardless of their origin, have access to the same opportunities. Lastly, the controversies surrounding Beta Israel's identity are not just a local or national problem but also have international repercussions. The Beta Israel narrative resonates with the Jewish diaspora worldwide, raising questions about inclusion and diversity within Judaism. Therefore, Beta Israel's struggle for recognition and acceptance is, ultimately, a microcosm of the broader struggles for identity and belonging in an increasingly globalized and interconnected world. And, as we reach the end of this intriguing journey through the history of Beta Israel, a reflection remains: what do we really know about the roots of this unique community? Are they direct descendants of the tribes of Israel or products of a rich cultural mixture over the centuries? Furthermore, how was this identity shaped by the many interactions they had with other cultures? These questions invite us to continue exploring and dive even deeper into the narratives surrounding the Ethiopian Jews. Each story brings with it a piece of the truth, a connection to the past that helps us better understand the present. Have you ever stopped to think about how a people's history can influence their current identity? Don't forget to leave your like if you enjoyed the video and share your opinions in the comments. Which aspects of the Beta Israel story intrigued you the most? Do you believe that genetics can really tell the story of a people? Let's continue this conversation in the comments. And, of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next discoveries about the fascinating biblical stories that surround us. See you next time.